Hello and welcome everyone today. This is the Center for Practice Management for the North Carolina Bar Association, and today we are going to be talking about how to prioritize um, in the face of pandemic response. So this is a situation we are currently dealing with, and a lot of firms are trying to figure out quickly how to go remote and how to continue to serve clients. We are going to have some resources in the bottom of the video where you can click on links for lots and lots of information. But what we thought we would do today is just go through and talk about how do you prioritize when the list is really long. And so joining me today, we have Heidi Alexander, who was the co-chair of ABA Tech Show 2020 with me, and she is a super knowledgeable person in terms of all things practice management and wellness as well. I'm Catherine Sanders Reach. I'm the director for the Center for Practice Management of the North Carolina Bar Association. And also joining us today is Eric Mazzoni, who may be very familiar to many of you. He was the former director of the Center for Practice Management and has now transitioned into the role of Senior Director Membership Experience. And he comes to this with a tremendous amount of experience, not to mention having to help the North Carolina Bar Association figure out how to go remotely as well, because it's something that we're all facing. So, what we're going to kind of do is go through how do we move into action mode quickly? What are the top priorities? And we're just going to look at a really long, scary list of things and try to focus on the things that you need to do now. And so, one of the things in a perfect world would be that we have some sort of plan or policy in place that gives us some idea of what to move forward with. For firms that are in areas that are prone to disasters like hurricanes and things, you may already have a pretty good business continuity plan that lets you move off site quickly. For firms that are further inland and have a brick and mortar shop, and you've got support staff and you've got lawyers, you may have a little bit more scrambling to do in order to go remote. So, Eric, do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, Catherine, thanks. So I think with respect to policies, at this point, with where we are dealing with COVID-19, you kind of are where you are. A firm is where it is with respect to policies. You either have a slate of policies that are meant to address business continuity and disaster recovery, or you don't. If you do, then now's the time to start following your policies and procedures. And I think it's not a great moment for rethinking policies at this point. Let me distinguish that for a second from plans. I think if you find yourself in a firm where you really haven't had the time to stop and put, policies down and to think through this stuff, you might be tempted to just start running around and doing things. This certainly feels like a moment where bias towards action is important, and it is. But running around in 10 different directions without thinking about it also is kind of a suboptimal approach to this. So I think even if you have done zero planning and zero prep, and I hope by now that's not the case, but if you have, I think this is the time to stop, take 20 minutes or half an hour and think through, what do I need to be thinking about? And we're hopefully going to hit some of these items as we go through today.
And Heidi, any other thoughts?
Yeah. So I definitely appreciate Eric's comment for sure. Obviously, if you don't have a paperless office right now, it's probably not the time to start going fully paperless, right? So I think, taking that 20 minutes and just prioritizing what do you need to do, and I think we're going to help with that today. I would, part of what I would be thinking about is the life cycle of a client matter, right? What do you need to do to make sure that you're going to meet your clients' deadlines if you can't meet them in person, or if you don't have access to your office? So think about the life cycle of a matter, and then also the operational side of the matter, right? What do you need to do in order to continue to pay your bills, and even if you're not in your office, in your physical office. So I would start with maybe a list of no more than 5 areas that you need to address ASAP, and then within each of those areas have some concrete, actionable tasks, and start there, and that'll feel, I think, a little bit less overwhelming.
Agreed. And so we're kind of looking at the top of the priority list, communicating with your clients and your employees because everybody is going to be experiencing this and a lot of new. Um, Working on your files and kind of triaging what you need to do based on deadlines, statute of limitations, while being aware that some of your court appearances may be moved around. So, basically, the concept of put your oxygen mask on first, make sure that your firm and your team is in place to be able to be responsive to your clients' needs and continue to move their matters forward. So, one primary form of communication that everybody relies on is telephony. And so, if you have a really traditional phone setup, maybe a hybrid PBX or a PBX, you may have fewer options in terms of how you deal with the phones. Because you won't be able to use the internet connection at your home to use the telephone system like you would with a voice over IP. So, any thoughts, Eric, on dealing with if you have a very traditional phone system and what you need to do to be able to answer phone calls at home?
Yeah, Catherine. But let me start with just saying something a little bit more basic. Uh, if you, and I agree that I think we're all on the same page that starting with phones makes sense in terms of thinking through the flow chart of this. But I think the very first thing that goes to my mind is you got to make sure you have a list of all of the key numbers. Hopefully that list is in your practice management software, or if it's not in that, then it's in your Outlook or your whatever else you use for your contacts database. But if you're in a position where you don't have a digital record of key numbers and contact information, now's the time to put that together. So you need obviously all staff, other key vendors and stakeholders, and then you need client contact. So before we get to how to deal with which phone system to use and so on, first make sure you know who you're calling, who's on the list, and how to reach them. And I would say at this point, I'd want phone, mobile, landline if they have it, and email, so that you have multiple methods of talking to them. But to your question, I guess from my perspective is we're in the very short term with whatever we're dealing with here is I would consider my mobile phone my backup if I had an office phone that didn't port well to going home. What do you think about that, Heidi?
So I agree with you. And I also think that, one of the things you can do, especially if you don't even know what type of phone you have in your office, maybe you know the provider, right? Maybe it's Comcast or Verizon. I would give them a call and ask them if they can forward your number to your cell phone. And that's just an easy way of taking care of it. And the other thing that you could do is if you don't want to use your cell phone, you could create a Google Voice account, which is a free option, and you could ask Comcast or Verizon or your other provider to actually forward your calls to your Google Voice number. And that's something that you can install onto your smartphone. You'll get a transcript of voicemail messages on either on your phone or actually to a web portal as well. So that's a pretty easy option. The other thing I think you could also do is you could consider hiring a virtual receptionist to route calls. So something like, Ruby Receptionist obviously is a big one, but tons of other services out there where they can accept your calls and then they can forward them to where they need to go. But you still have to, that would require you to actually have some sort of voice over internet type of capability. So I would start with your service, your current service, and then use your cell phone or a Google Voice number.
Those are great tips, Heidi. I agree with everything you just said, and I think, Catherine, it probably makes sense for us to acknowledge that as table stakes here, we're assuming that whatever location that folks have had to go work remote from, the baseline is you have some kind of internet connection.
Yes, I hope so. And I guess one of the things is if your provider is of no use to you and is not helping you, get a Google Voice number. or use your mobile number and set your phones at the office with an out of office voicemail that says please dial this number. That's the, last resort. Your number doesn't roll over, you just have to tell people where to call you. And that should work. So, kind of moving on to the next thing is, as Eric pointed out, we're first making sure we have a list of all of our contacts that we can pull or put together quickly. We're going to figure out where people are going to call us and figure out how to let them know where to call us. And then the next thing is kind of looking at triaging your deadlines based on your calendar, and then let everybody know what's first, what's second. So looking at calendars and deadlines. So any thoughts about how to kind of pull that together?
Well, as you know, at the Bar Association, we use Office 365 as the back end for our calendar system. So that's really helpful because it allows us, without a server on premises, to all share access within the organization with each other's calendars. So that's the place that we start from. Google makes a comparative product. I forget what they call it now. Is it G Suite for Business or something like that?
Uh-huh.
Yeah. So those are both nice in terms of being able to share stuff remotely with staff and other members of the firm, which is altogether a lot more important when you're all sitting in different buildings than when you're sitting down the hall from one another.
So Heidi, what about
Yeah,
those?
I think it's pretty. Oh, go ahead.
Oh no, I
Go
was.
ahead.
Go ahead.
No, well, I was just going to reiterate. I mean, the G Suite and Google. I mean, that again, that's a really easy option if you need to do something really quickly. If you need to set up a shared calendar, you can do it in Google. I mean, if let's say you already have an account, right? If you already have a Google account and maybe someone on your staff has a Google account, you can create a shared calendar among the two of you. So you don't have to feel like you have to do the research around, should I go with G Suite or should I go with Office 365, which are both great products, but just open the Google Calendar and share it, and you can always migrate that somewhere later.
I do know that there are firms that don't use an electronic calendar at all, or there are some firms where some of the people use an electronic calendar and other people have a paper calendar. To get everybody on par, I guess my suggestion would be for those who keep a paper calendar, scan it. You don't have to have a scanner. You can take your mobile device and scan it. There's lots of apps that you can use to scan paper, or you can just take a picture of it, so that you can all at least know what's kind of lining up on everybody's radar in terms of deadlines, and share that information, even if it's an email with a copy of the picture of your calendar. So I know, because different firms work in different ways and different people in the firms work in different ways. So one thing you're going to do is have to kind of all figure out, where do I keep my stuff and how do I share it with other people, because you won't be able to walk down the hall and share it. Which kind of brings me to another concept, in terms of triaging and looking at deadlines, is task management. Again, in a firm setting where you're kind of in a brick and mortar shop, you can tell somebody every day. You can have a stand-up meeting. Here's what's going to happen today, or here's what we're looking at today. What can we do in a shared environment to kind of get on top of tasks and deadlines? Eric, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of great products out there to help with this. And again, I'm going to assume that for the folks listening, that most of them aren't in a practice management software that has an integrated task list in it, like the way Clio does, for example. So let's just slide that aside. And then I'd say let's sort of think of it in two buckets. The first bucket is somebody who doesn't need to share their list with anyone. Okay, so for them, world's your oyster. Apple's reminders is actually really good now. There's just a ton of these things available for both Windows and Mac in terms of different programs to manage to-do lists. The other group is the group of folks that needs to share lists, needs to share tasks, needs to be able to review work that other people are doing. And for them, they're going to need a slightly more beefed up task manager. And for that, the one I use is the one that comes bundled with Office 365. It's Microsoft To Do. I also think it's free. It's free, available from the App Store anyway. I'm reasonably sure that you can use that even without the Office 365 subscription. And the association also, some folks really like Todoist, which I think has been a really strong contender for managing tasks and allows you to delegate and to oversee other folks' tasks as well.
Heidi, any favorites for task management?
I mean, I like Asana. I do think that, this is obviously something that's probably not going to be on your priority list, but it's going to be something that, if you're going to be out of your office for for potentially a longer period of time, maybe a couple of months, this is definitely something I would look into implementing with a team.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. That's really, that's right on the money. Like, this isn't the top of the list, but if we're looking at a longer time out of the office, I think that's really smart, Heidi.
Yeah. Or, I guess just creating a Word document with, okay, here's what we need to be working on right now. Again, kind of
Right.
getting everybody on the
Mm-hmm.
same page in terms of what matters need to be
Right.
taken care of. So, obviously, everybody probably has a way to email. The only thing that I think that's worth noting here is that in some law offices, you may have support staff who work in the office who are only expected to work Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. They have Outlook or some sort of email software on their desktops where they're actually running a desktop, so they're not used to checking their email from home. So make sure that everybody knows how to access the firm's email. If you're using an Exchange server, you have OWA. If you're using Office 365, you just go to office.com and click on the email and log in. Google, obviously, again, just know where to go and log in, but just make sure everybody knows how to get email if they're off site, because even though that seems obvious, and for the lawyers, that's going to be, it's on your phone, it's everywhere. You don't want it to be. But with your team, they may struggle with this a little bit.
That's a great tip.
So, moving to your client files and documents and making sure that everybody has access to them and able to share them. Heidi, kind of going back to the concept of a more paper-based office firm that has not necessarily gone fully digital, when the print file is the file of record, any notions of what we can do quickly to get everybody up to speed?
Yeah, I mean, and I think that this is really going to be part of your your triage and your priority list, is trying to figure out what files you need immediate access to, and figuring out, if those are hard copy files, do you need the full file or do you need part of the file? And I would probably start with your active cases, and then, if you don't. If you can take those with you, it's you could take them with you. Make sure that they're secure. What I have a concern with is if you keep them in your office and they're not in a secure area, or maybe they're prone to water damage, something like that, or some sort of damage. You want to make sure that they're secure. And then in terms of trying to convert them to a digital copy. Again, you probably don't want to go full paperless right now, but you could use a scanning tool to scan maybe just the things that you're working on, or just some of these active cases. And one comment I wanted to make, going back to the print calendars and scanning pages. So when we're talking about scanning, if you don't have a physical, like a big physical scanner, like a ScanSnap or one of these others, or a big a leaf scanner, you can use a mobile scanner, something like Scannable. So Evernote makes Scannable, which I just happen to like. It's a free scanning tool that you download onto your mobile device, and you hold it over a piece of paper, and you can create a multi-page PDF. And it takes only a couple of minutes. And I will say that I actually today I walked a client through this. A client who was supposed to meet with me wanted to fax me something, and I said, no way, we're not going to be in the office. And by the way, I don't accept faxes any longer anyhow. And I'm going to teach you how to scan something using this. And so over the phone, I actually talked to this attorney. I helped them actually upload the scannable and scan the pages that he needed to and send them over to me. I did the same thing when I actually sent my accountant my taxes. I looked over at my Fujitsu ScanSnap and said, I don't really want to use this right now because I don't want to have to plug it in and configure it. I use my mobile phone, and it took me a matter of minutes to do this. So I would highly recommend getting yourself one of those scanners.
Yeah.
Mobile
Yeah, I
scanners.
totally agree with that. Because a lot of the apps, Dropbox and OneDrive, for example, have a scanner built right into them. So if you combine
Yeah, right.
your phone with that, it's really slick and easy to go right from
Yeah.
basically, if you can take a picture with your phone, you can scan and upload.
And the new
Yeah, that's a
Office
really
app.
good point. Something like Dropbox. Sorry, Catherine.
Oh no, that's
I
okay.
got excited about that. No, I always forget that one. I always forget that Dropbox has a scanner built in, and so you can just, if you have the Dropbox app and you download the Dropbox app, you can just scan it right into a cloud storage. I know we're going to talk about
Right.
that in a moment, but
Well, and
that's
I
great.
guess the good thing is that's pretty common. Adobe Acrobat, the Acrobat app has a scanner built in and it'll scan directly to DC if that's the product you're using. If you have Office 365 and you're using OneDrive, the Office app will scan directly to OneDrive through the Lens product. So look at what you've got. And the good thing is there's a whole lot of features and functions you probably have never used. But start with the stuff that you're already using first. I do want to mention for, again, with the firms who've got different people doing different things, one of the things that I've run into is that there will be a couple of attorneys in the office while they have a server and the paper file is the file of record. Those attorneys are also putting files into a Dropbox or a box or a Google Drive or something like that so they can work from home. Um, they need to put those in a place where they can be shared with the rest of the firm. A lot of times you may have a small group of attorneys who are kind of acting as individual attorneys with a firm name overhead. So make sure that information is shared. And the good thing is it's pretty easy to do if it's already digital.
And why don't maybe we should just say at this point, if you are going to a cloud storage service and you haven't previously, just make sure you're using a strong password and multi-factor or two-factor authentication, which you can set up with any of these services. But with that, you should be pretty secure.
Yep. Agree.
Always an important tip. Hey, can I say one more thing before we leave paper files, Catherine?
Yep.
I think if you're in a law firm that has primarily paper files, you have had a system for keeping all of those in one place. It's that they all live in the firm. If you are now about to send a bunch of files home with a bunch of different people to different locations, I think it makes sense to assign someone, even if that someone has to be you, to make an inventory of which files are leaving and what location they're going to, because when this disruption ends, you're going to want to make sure that all of them have been repatriated back to the office.
Absolutely. Which is, a good
That is
case
a
for
great tip.
digitizing it before instead of taking it with. It just makes sense, but you may not have
Mm-hmm.
time. It just depends on how many files we're talking about. So, another big priority is communicating not just with your team and how you're going to continue to do business, but also with your clients. And so you've already gathered your client contact information and let them know, where to call you. It's something that I've been seeing a whole lot of. Every company I've done business with in the last, I don't know, decade, I'm getting emails from them about how they're handling the situation, how we're going to communicate, and their commitment to providing service to us. So I feel like that's also something that law firms should be doing. which means you kind of have to figure out how you're going to do that. But just getting in touch with your clients to let them know what's going on and give them some peace of mind, I think is very important. But when you're working with your clients, the other thing to think about is how are we going to share files with them? So, Eric, got thoughts?
Yeah. Well, the way my default method for sharing files, I think like a lot of folks, is probably the least secure way you can do this is by email. I email stuff around just way more than I ought to. What I really ought to do more is use Dropbox and OneDrive for sharing. It creates shareable links. You can password protect, and it just adds a layer of security onto doing that. The only times I have meaningfully really done that is when I'm sending too many things or they're too big to be received through email on the other side. But that's been my approach to it.
Heidi, any other thoughts about sharing files?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, in a perfect world, I think we'd all probably love for the attorneys to be using a practice management system or a case management system, so they can share things through a secure portal. But if you don't have that right now, it may not be the time to be looking at it unless you've gotten down your priority list. Maybe at the end of your priority list, you can say, okay, maybe I can implement one of these systems. But yes, I think through the cloud storage repositories, also. That was the end of my thought. I
Okay.
can end there.
And
I
I
had
think it's worth
another something.
Oh, I'm sorry. Did I interrupt, Heidi?
No, nope, you didn't.
Okay. Well, another thought about this with respect to working with clients is that for a lot of lawyers, things are not going to change that much in terms of the way they interact with clients. A lot of client work is done by phone and email already.
Hmm.
So that is potentially one of the less disruptive portions of this. I think it's worth thinking through how different your system is going to be for communication with your coworkers, who you probably rely on proximity to a great degree to provide communication. And all of a sudden, you're going to find yourself in a place where you don't have proximity, and you're going to have to really try hard to think through how to over communicate to compensate for the fact that you won't bump into each other 5 times a day.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
So, which kind of brings us to what we're doing now, which is we're using a platform called Zoom to hold a video conference. Heidi's got kids at home, and that's going to be a situation for a lot of folks, and so she's not sharing her video camera with us. And so, you know, video conferencing with your team and also with your clients is not only going to help in terms of having that face-to-face interaction feeling that we get, but also it's going to help with isolation, I think, because when everybody's kind of stuck sheltering in place, you may start feeling isolated, and so being able to use Zoom, which is free, for if you have multiple parties on the call, you can use it for free up to 40 minutes. If it's a one-to-one, it's unlimited. So something like Zoom, you may already have some sort of web conferencing system in place. There's no reason to go out and get a Zoom account if you already use something like WebEx, although people really like Zoom because it's super easy. It can be recorded. And you can share your screen, you can chat, you can do all sorts of things. So it's a great platform for keeping kind of incommunicado with your team and with your clients.
Can
Yeah,
I
I
say
agree,
something
Catherine.
about? Oh,
Sorry,
go
Heidi,
ahead.
go ahead.
Go
No,
ahead,
please
Eric.
go.
No. Well, Catherine, you brought up, my kids, and I wanted to make a comment about that because there are at this point there are going to be a lot of practitioners who are home and maybe have kids in the house, or also are used to being in an office all day, every day and not working from home. So it's a big shift, and so I participate in a bunch of sort of online groups of attorney moms and parents and those sorts of things. And I think that what everyone, the consensus is that if you can build in a schedule, and I think this applies to everyone across the board, whether you have kids or not, where you have a schedule for yourself so that it doesn't feel like you're sort of trying to work around the clock. It's, you still have that normal work day. You get up in the morning, maybe make sure you get dressed, right? And if you've got kids, like make sure you create some time in a schedule for them so that, like right now, my kids have their quiet time, which is really a euphemism for watching TV. They've got that time, right? And I can actually sit here and do a webinar, or I could be having a client call, that sort of thing. So you can kind of plan your day that way. And I think that's going to become more and more important as, more drastic measures are taken out there.
Yep. So, which gets me to kind of the concept of an in-person meeting. We've all been talking about being remote, but the reality is there's going to be situations where you're going to need to meet with a client. And so what are the kind of things that we should be contemplating? Well, we need to be at a closing, or we need to have a court appearance. Eric, do you have some thoughts about best practices for in-person meetings in this weird
Just
time?
first, to pay attention to what the federal and state authorities are saying, what the CDC and WHO are recommending, so that you're staying within the lines on that. And then I think we're all starting to internalize this idea of being 6 feet away from somebody, or at least not closer than that for not longer than 10 minutes, making sure I don't walk out the door without some kind of hand sanitizer or something to take care of my hands, and cough into the crook of your elbow and all of that. We have to be mindful not just of us not trying to get sick, but also that we might be sick without knowing it and not spreading it and making it worse.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, and again, there's a lot that can be done via video calls and telephone calls, but in some cases, you're going to have to meet in person, which kind of we'll get to signatures in a second, or we may actually not. In the materials that I put together, there's a whole lot of ways to get signatures without necessarily meeting in person. So if that's what's kind of freaking you out, um, in some cases you might have to delay getting that physical signature, or considering getting an e-signature. But Heidi, you had mentioned kind of security, and obviously all these tools are great, but confidentiality and security is still going to be a priority for the firm. That your ethical responsibilities don't go out the window in a disaster, which most of again the firms that are in more disaster prone areas understand. And so thinking about working from home, what kind of security issues might be at play there? Heidi?
Yeah. Well, oh, yeah.
No, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. So I think, hopefully you have a secure internet setup in your office. But I think people don't think about the setup of their home as much, which can certainly be a weak spot. You do want to make sure that you change the default passwords on your router. So typically with some of these routers, you can look on the side where the serial number is, and it gives you the access information for your router, and you can sign in there, and you can actually change the default password. And then also make sure that WPA2 encryption is turned on. Those are probably the most important things. You're probably not going to go out and buy a firewall right now. It may actually be built into your router. So I would be making sure that the encryption is turned on. And then, if you are somewhere where you're using public internet, or maybe you don't get internet in your house and maybe you're getting it from your neighbor, in that situation, you don't know how if or how they've locked down their internet. So I would use some sort of VPN client. There's one called encrypt.me. There's other ones out there. And something like that, it's pretty easy to set up, but basically it creates a tunnel and uses that public internet, but it creates a tunnel so that whatever you do if you're uploading and downloading from the internet, it will be encrypted. And then finally, you could also use your phone as a mobile hotspot. So you can actually link your devices to your phone, and they basically take they use the internet off of your phone's data plan, so they're never actually connected to a public internet. And that you could probably go on to, you may be able to go on to, if you're using Sprint or Verizon or something like that, and actually add the hotspot online. It's usually about $10 a month for something like that. So definitely lots of different options, but just something to be aware of.
So to kind of get to something that's probably on a lot of people's minds, making money stretch and getting paid. So one thing that I got a notice from my bank that offered to extend me a loan if I get short of cash. So if you are worried about making payroll, if you're worried about expenses and not necessarily onboarding new clients during this time, see if you can secure a line of credit or get a small business loan or another kind of loan. There's been a number of congressional activities looking at providing relief in different areas. So we're just going to have to keep our eye on what we're going to get. But the other thing is, I think a lot of firms probably mail bills out. And since you're not going to be in the office, you're not going to have your printer, you're not going to have your letterhead. What are options for sending bills? Eric, do you have any thoughts?
Well, I think email comes to mind as the main way of sending these out, and you can still handle paper the way Heidi mentioned earlier, and I think you mentioned earlier as well, Catherine, about scanning paper things and having them sent digitally that way if you don't have a way to instantly create a native digital document. That would, I think, probably be the first blush approach of that.
I think I would probably take an inventory of the services that you're using, and if you know that you're receiving like paper invoices and you're not going to be in your office, right, I would call those companies and tell them to send them to another address, right, your home address, so you can actually still receive those. And while the mail is still running, I know, I'm sorry, I'm very gloom and doom here, but you could actually send checks out from your house, or wherever you are. So if you can't set up an electronic account, that's another way. But obviously, make sure that you've collected everything from your office, checkbooks, that sort of thing, just to make sure that you have the ability to send it out.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess just be aware that, again, the rules don't fall out the window. So don't take credit cards via email, because there's PCI compliance. If you use a merchant provider like LawPay, you can get a link from them. Give your client the link and they can click on it and pay with a credit card, and it'll go directly in your account, and you don't have to worry about handling sensitive information. So there's options like that. And then just to kind of wrap this up, start thinking about what your clients are going to have to deal with. You may find that your practice area is not one of the ones where you get super busy after all this stops. And so think about how you can be proactive about what kind of legal issues are your clients going to be having, and what can you do to help them out. So kind of look at what you already have, think about what your clients' needs are. This hopefully is not a permanent thing. So don't get too obsessive about buying a ton of stuff. Look at free and low cost options. There's a lot of products on the market that have a 30-day free trial. You could start with that if you need to get new technology. Any other thoughts, Heidi?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of going back to sort of financial issues, you may find yourself in a position of, potentially not, maybe you lose work. If you're a trial attorney and the courts are closed. I mean, we have courts here in Massachusetts that just closed. So, if that's you, I mean, you could look online through some of these sort of freelancing platforms, like something like Law Clerk or project-based platforms where, maybe you're getting a project from a larger firm who has some institutional clients and they need you to do something one-off. So you could look to some of those just to kind of sustain your income for a period of time. And I think you're right, Catherine, that we do have to look at this as a temporary period. It may be longer than we initially thought, but it is a temporary period. And I think it's also an opportunity for firms to really get jump started on this idea of a remote workplace or a virtual firm, which I think, now I think a lot of firms have to be on board with that. One, your clients are going to demand it. And two, it's sort of the way of the present, really. And so I think it provides an opportunity for you to kind of take some steps forward and start to implement those into your business and into your plans and into your continuity plans. So I would encourage people to kind of look at it as an opportunity.
Hmm. Thanks, Heidi. Eric, any final thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with exactly what Heidi said. This is not forever, but we are looking into it and we can't see how far it goes. It could be 2 weeks, it could be 2 months. We just can't tell. So I do think it's worth spending some of this time where we're in this disruption to plan for what comes ahead. And we haven't really dealt with financial issues on this. Maybe that'll be a subject of another webinar when we have some time to do another one. But I think protecting cash flow is really important. We've got to, live to fight another day at the end of this. There's going to be opportunities and there's going to be things to be done, clients to be served once we come through this, but you have to get through it successfully. So start taking to the extent possible, and it's hard right now because there's this total focus on right now, everything's happening so fast and you can't look forward beyond about 30 seconds before the next thing happens. But getting a slightly longer term orientation of 3 months, 6 months, I think will be real helpful to figuring out how to do well through this process.
Absolutely. So I thank the two of you for your time today. And if you email me, I will be more than happy to pass any questions you have on to Heidi or Eric. And again, we'll have some other resources for you with greater in-depth information and hyperlinks in addition to this video and other resources as fast as we can get them out to you. So everybody hang tough, be flexible, and thanks again, Eric and Heidi, for joining me today.
Thank you, Catherine. Thank you, Heidi.
Thanks, Catherine. Thanks, Eric.